SEP Fanfic Readings presents 1,000 Words by OliveJuice28. Chapter 64. Final Moments. Saturday was a flurry of activity all throughout the castle, as all the students were packing to leave for the summer, saying goodbye to friends, and sending off last-minute owls reminding family members when the train would be arriving back at King's Cross the next day. The 8th-year dormitory was no different, as housemates could be seen bustling back and forth between each other's rooms, returning borrowed items, exchanging addresses, and other important information in order to stay in touch. Amidst their preparations, their head of house made one final visit that afternoon. "Hello!" Bill called out as he entered the vast space. Padma and Daphne were chatting in Luna's doorway, and Dean had just emerged from his room, so he enlisted their help with rounding up the others. Once the 10 graduates were assembled, he grinned at them and explained why he was there. "Just a few final announcements that I didn't want to forget, or have anyone miss out on tomorrow morning as you're all leaving. First, the headmistress wanted each of you to be aware of your flu appointment times." With that, he waved his wand and the familiar scroll of names and time slots appeared, which he handed to Hannah, who stood closest. "McGonagall also wanted me to let you know that your game nights can continue on a monthly basis here next school year." While the 8th years were very happy with this news, it was something they'd already been told the week before, after Dean and Hermione had spoken to the headmistress about their idea. Looks of confusion met Bill's statement, and he chuckled in understanding. "I mean, here, in the room. You can still use this space." That pronouncement garnered a whole different reaction, as wide smiles and excited cheers punctuated the news. "That's wonderful," Hermione explained. "So they're leaving this as a dormitory?" "To some extent," Bill explained. "McGonagall said it would be nice to use it for guests, instead of trying to fit them into random vacant faculty quarters, especially since there won't be as many of those available next year with several new staff members coming on board." He nodded at Draco as he said the last bit, and the tall blonde grinned in response. "When you lot come up every month, the room will be yours, and from what I understand, the chambers will stay as they are now, even if other guests use them." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the small group, but they were pleased to know something of themselves would be left behind in what had become their second home for all of them. "Just make sure you give a heads up for your arrival dates, so the flue will be open and the room refreshened," the eldest Weasley continued. "The last bit of information I have for you all is that after the leaving feast this evening, there's to be a fireworks display over the Black Lake. Compliments of my brother's shop." A smattering of applause broke out over this, with everyone remembering the impressive displays Weasley Wizard Wheezes had produced in years past. Bill clapped his hands together and took a long look at the group of students surrounding him. "I think that's it. I'll be by in the morning to make sure everyone's getting off all right, but I just want you lot to know how much I've enjoyed teaching you this year and being your head of house. I'm proud to know each one of you, and look forward to hearing all your exciting news every time you return to the castle." With that, he approached each of them individually with a hug or a handshake and a specific word of encouragement. When he'd finished, there were several sniffles heard and more than a few eyes wiped, including his own as he waved and headed out the door. "Oh, I'm tired of crying so much," Padma wailed, blinking furiously at the ceiling. "I know," Hannah commiserated. "I think I've been in floods at least twice a week since the memorial service, though most of it was stress-related." She gave a wry chuckle and patted her cheeks. "I don't know what you're all so weepy about," Theo grumbled. "It's just school." But everyone could see the red rims of his eyes, and had caught him getting teary at the graduation ceremony. "It's okay to be sad, Theo," Luna offered as she looped her arm through his. "I'm going to miss this place immensely. It's been a refuge of healing for all of us, I think." As always, the fairy-like blonde's ability to hone in on everyone's thoughts was impressive. Being back at Hogwarts had given each of them a sense of normalcy and security after an extremely tumultuous period, particularly for several of the recent graduates. Even more so, the room had become a place of peace, friendship, comfort, and belonging, and those all-encompassing attributes would be sorely missed as they stepped out on their own. "Well, at the risk of sounding like a complete sod," Anthony cleared his throat, "I, for one, am very glad we'll be continuing with our game nights. Knowing we'll be back here regularly makes it easier to leave, at least for me." Nods of agreement and murmurs of understanding filled the space between the housemates. For a second or two, no one spoke, and then Hannah piped up. "Oh, I almost forgot!" She scurried off to her room, leaving her friends staring after her in amused speculation. In less than a minute, she returned with a sizable stack of small books in her arms. "I made one of these for each of you. Figured it'd be easier to keep track of than just a handful of loose photos. All 9 of them received a 5x7 photo album, filled with pictures that had been taken throughout the second term. Many of them were duplicates of the ones from the bulletin board and the table centerpieces, and roughly 3/4 of everyone's albums were exactly the same. However, there were several pictures in each one that were specific to the recipient. For example, Neville's book contained a few extras of him and Hannah, as well as a photo of him and his grand from graduation, and another of him and Professor Sprout from that day as well. Draco's included pictures of him with Narcissa and Andromeda, with Harry and Alcott, with Bill, and one of him with Hermione he'd never seen before. It had clearly been taken in the days leading up to the NEWT exams. They were sitting on the couch together with their usual spread of textbooks and scrolls around them. Their heads were bent together over a single sheet of notes, and the magical loop that played showed them looking up at each other, him saying something sarcastic based on the arch of his brow, and Hermione laughing before kissing him on the cheek. It was simple and sweet, and captured them perfectly. He couldn't help the grin that spread across his face as he watched it over and over. Hermione's photo album contained a few new pictures of her and Draco, too, as well as ones of her with Harry, with Professor McGonagall, and her parents, which brought another round of tears to her eyes. But the last picture was her favorite. It was the one her father had insisted Draco join them for, and the 4 of them stood together, arms around each other, wide smiles on their faces. The joy emanating from them was palpable, and she knew she would treasure the image forever. She was blinking rapidly in an attempt to banish her tears when Draco came up beside her and saw what had captured her attention. "What a great photograph," he mused. "Worth 1,000 words, wouldn't you say?" He smiled and nudged her with his arm before wrapping it around her shoulders. She gazed up at him, a few tears still clinging in her lashes, but her smile was as bright as the sun. "No," she breathed. "This one's priceless." And she turned into him, encircling his waist with her arms and pressing her cheek to his chest. He returned her embrace and pressed a kiss to the crown of her head. Their quiet moment was interrupted by Dean announcing they needed to head down to the leaving feast, and everyone rushed to put their albums in their room before heading out the door. The leaving feast was loud and boisterous, each table filled with a combination of students from every house and covered with a variety of delicious foods. The air was ringing with laughter and excited chatter as everyone celebrated the end of the successful year. Hermione was at a table with her 3 first-years, as well as Draco and his 2 charges. All of the younger students were very pleased to hear that their mentors would be returning on a regular basis the following year, though Olivia and Christopher took every opportunity to smugly remind their friends that their mentors would be around all the time. Neville's students were able to boast about that as well, since he would be returning as Professor Sprout's apprentice while he worked on his mastery in herbology. And Daphne's young friends would have easier access to her than many, since she moved into the shop in Hogsmeade. As they chatted about summer plans, both Draco and Hermione pulled out thick envelopes for each of their first years. Hannah had developed copies of all the photos that included the younger students, so they could each have their own to keep. All 5 of them were incredibly pleased to receive such thoughtful mementos, and extra tight squeezes were given in thanks. When the feast was officially over, everyone made their way out to the lawn for the fireworks, spreading cloaks and blankets down on the grass, where they settled in for what was sure to be a good show. Without warning, the sky lit up with a gigantic boom as huge spirals of glittering lights filled the dark space. For the next 15 minutes, the audience was captivated by lights and colors, swirling stars, and the outlines of magical creatures. It was beautiful and amazing, and the perfect way to end the year. The 8th years had all gathered together on one section of grass, sitting closer together than most other groups, with arms draped around each other's shoulders, and hands clasped in friendship. There might have been a few more tears, though Theo would vehemently deny it if asked, and several kisses by the light of the giant sparklers, but above all else, there was a sense of peace and fulfillment. They had accomplished what they came back to do, as well as quite a bit more, and now a wide-open future awaited them, just brimming with possibilities. The end.